The great hall stretched for miles in every direction, and its walls glowed with a soft blue light that had been shining for 50 million years. Elder Zephyr stood at the center of the massive chamber, and his ancient form barely cast a shadow despite his towering height. Around him sat representatives from hundreds of worlds, and each species had earned their place through wisdom and age that spanned countless centuries. The Eternary had called this meeting, and that alone made every being in the hall nervous. In all their long history, the Eternary had never shown fear of anything. They were the first race to achieve true immortality and had guided the galaxy through wars that could have destroyed entire star clusters. Their mathematics could predict the rise and fall of civilizations with perfect accuracy, and their technology could reshape reality itself. But today, Elder Zephyr spoke of something that made even his ancient voice tremble with uncertainty. "We have discovered a species that should not exist," he began, and his words echoed through the vast space. "They call themselves humans, and they come from a small blue world in what they name the Milky Way galaxy. According to every model we have, built over 50 million years of observation, they should have destroyed themselves long ago." The representatives stirred uneasily in their seats. The Vorthan ambassador leaned forward with his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's light. The Kelmeric delegate shifted her massive bulk, and her 6 eyes focused intently on the Eternary. "Elder, even the energy beams from the Proxima cluster seem to pulse with increased frequency. Their planet should be a dead rock floating in space," Zephyr continued. "Our calculations show they should have poisoned their atmosphere with industrial waste by their year 1800. Instead, they learned to clean the air and made it better than before. They should have run out of energy sources by 1900. Instead, they harnessed their star's power and learned to split atoms safely. They should have destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons by 2000. Instead, they put those weapons away and reached for the stars." Far across the galaxy, Commander Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair of the UES Horizon and watched the stars streak past through the viewport. His ship was one of humanity's newest exploration vessels, and it carried a crew of 200 brave souls who had volunteered to map the unknown regions beyond human space. Jake had been exploring the void for 3 years now, and each day brought new wonders that filled him with pride for his species. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," called out Lisa Carter from her position at the navigation console. Her young face showed confusion as she studied the readings. "It's coming from the Vega system, but the signal is like nothing I've ever seen before." Ryan Bell looked up from his engineering station, and his weathered hands paused over the control panels. "The pattern is too complex for any human technology, sir. The mathematics alone would require computers we don't have yet." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but kept his voice steady. "Put it through the main speakers, Lisa." The voice that filled the bridge spoke perfect English with an accent that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Greetings, humans of the vessel Horizon. We are the Eternary, and we extend an invitation to your species. You are requested to send representatives to the neutral station of Kepler 442 for what your people will call a diplomatic gathering. This is not a request you can refuse." The transmission ended and left the bridge in silence. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same mixture of excitement and fear in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now they had their answer. Back in the Great Hall, Elder Zephyr continued his address to the assembled races. "The humans have broken every pattern we understand. When they encountered their first artificial intelligence, they did not fight it or destroy it. They made it their partner and friend. When they found genetic diseases, they did not accept them as fate. They rewrote their own DNA and made themselves stronger. When they depleted their oceans, they did not abandon them. They cleaned every drop and filled them with life again." The elder's form seemed to grow larger as his agitation increased. Most disturbing of all is their reaction to death itself. Every species accepts mortality as the natural order. The humans fight it with every breath they take. They extend their lives through medicine and technology, but more than that, they refuse to let death have meaning. They save strangers at the cost of their own lives. They sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. They choose to die for others when they could choose to live for themselves. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. This behavior was indeed unprecedented in galactic history. Most species develop wisdom through age and learn to value survival above all other considerations. The humans seem to have developed in the opposite direction. We have modeled every possible outcome for this species, Zeppelin said, and his voice carried the weight of eons. In 67% of scenarios, they will trigger a galactic war within the next 1,000 years. In 28%, they will accidentally destroy multiple star systems through reckless experimentation. In the remaining 5%, they will transcend physical existence entirely and leave the galaxy forever. The implications hung heavy in the air like a toxic cloud. If the Eternary's models were correct, then humanity represented the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. But if their models were wrong, then everything they thought they knew about civilization and evolution was meaningless. Jake Morrison made his decision and turned to his crew. Set course for Kepler 442, he ordered. It's time humanity met its neighbors. The neutral station of Kepler 442 hung in space, like a massive silver sphere, and its surface reflected the light of 3 distant suns. Jake Morrison stood at the viewport of his shuttle and felt his breath catch in his throat. The station was larger than Earth's moon, and its smooth walls seemed to pulse with an inner light that spoke of technology beyond human understanding. First time seeing a ternary architecture, Captain, said Lisa Carter as she guided their shuttle toward the docking bay. The readings show this thing is hollow all the way through with artificial gravity that changes direction based on where you're standing. Ryan Bell checked his instruments one more time and shook his head in amazement. The power source alone would require the entire output of our sun for 1,000 years. These beings are playing in a league we can't even imagine. The docking procedure was smooth and automated, and Jake found himself walking through corridors that stretched beyond his vision. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, and the air itself hummed with energy that made his skin tingle. He was not alone on this journey. Dr. Helen Ross walked beside him, and her scientific mind was already cataloging every detail of their surroundings. Captain Paul Grant brought up the rear, and his military bearing remained steady despite the obvious signs of nervousness in his eyes. Amy Stone served as their translator, though Jake suspected they would not need her services. Every alien race they had encountered so far seemed to speak perfect English, and he wondered if that was another sign of their advanced technology or something more sinister. The great hall they entered was beyond anything Jake had imagined. Beings from across the galaxy sat in perfect rows, and their forms varied from the familiar humanoid shapes to creatures that seemed to be made of pure energy. At the center of it all stood Elder Zephon, and his presence filled the entire space with an authority that made Jake's knees want to buckle. "Welcome, humans," the Elder said, and his voice carried easily across the vast distance. "You stand before the Galactic Preservation Council, and today we will determine the fate of your species." Dr. Helen Ross stepped forward, and her scientific training overcame her natural fear. "We appreciate the invitation, Elder Zephon, but we're curious about the nature of this council. Are we on trial for some crime we're not aware of?" A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the assembled delegates. Elder Zephon shifted slightly, and Jake realized the being was choosing how to appear to them. The shape that emerged was vaguely humanoid, but stretched upward to impossible heights. "Your crime, human, is existing in a way that should not be possible," Zephon replied. "We have studied your species for the past century, and you violate every law of civilizational development we have discovered in 50 million years of observation." Captain Paul Grant moved to stand beside Dr. Ross, and his hand instinctively moved toward where his weapon would normally hang. "What laws are those exactly?" "We've developed naturally just like any other species. That is precisely the problem, Zephyr said, and gestured toward a massive display that materialized in the air above them. Observe the mathematical certainty that governs all species development. The display showed a complex web of equations and probability curves that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. Amy Stone gasped and pointed at sections of the display that seemed to be moving on their own. Every species follows predictable patterns, Zephyr explained, as the display shifted to show historical examples. The Vorthons developed spaceflight in their year 4847, and we predicted it would happen in year 4851. The Kelmerids achieved artificial intelligence in year 12,203, and our models showed it occurring in year 12,198. The energy beings of Proxima transcended physical form in year 890,445, and we calculated happening in year 890,447. Dr. Ross studied the display with growing amazement. Your prediction accuracy is incredible, but I still don't see the problem. The problem appears when we apply these same models to humanity, Zephyr said, and the display changed to show Earth's history. You should have destroyed yourselves with nuclear weapons in your year 2087. Instead, you disarmed voluntarily in 2156. You should have created artificial intelligence that turned against you in 2234. Instead, you formed partnerships with your AI creations. You should have exhausted your planet's resources by 2298. Instead, you learned to live in perfect harmony with your world. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and confusion as he watched humanity's actual history play out alongside the eternary predictions. Every major milestone was wrong by decades or centuries, and the pattern seemed to show humanity consistently choosing cooperation over conflict. Most disturbing is your approach to death and suffering, Zephyr continued, and the display showed images that made Jake's heart clench. When the plague struck your African continent in 2134, the logical response was to quarantine the region and let the disease burn itself out. Instead, you sent your best doctors into the infected zones, knowing they would likely die. When the asteroid threatened your moon colony in 2187, the rational choice was to evacuate and rebuild elsewhere. Instead, you chose to sacrifice 3 ships and their crews to deflect the rock and save a few thousand colonists. Amy Stone wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the heroic moments of human history unfold. Those people died to save others. How is that disturbing? Because it makes no mathematical sense, Zephyr replied, and his voice carried a note of genuine confusion. Survival is the primary drive of all intelligent life. Self-preservation should override all other considerations. Yet humans consistently choose death over dishonor and sacrifice over safety. This behavior cannot be modeled or predicted. Captain Grant straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the towering alien. Maybe that's because some things are more important than survival. Maybe that's what makes us human. And that is exactly why you terrify us, Zephyr said, and the admission seemed to surprise even him. We have guided this galaxy for 50 million years based on our understanding of how intelligence develops and spreads. If we cannot predict or understand humanity, then our entire foundation of knowledge becomes meaningless. Dr. Ross felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. You're not afraid of what we might do to you. You're afraid of what we represent to your worldview. Precisely, Zephyr confirmed. If humans can develop in impossible ways, then perhaps other species can as well. If our models are wrong about you, they might be wrong about everything. The order we have maintained for eons could collapse into chaos. The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake realized they were not just representing humanity in some diplomatic meeting. They were challenging the very foundation of galactic civilization simply by existing. What happens now? Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Elder Zephyr's form seemed to grow even larger, and his voice carried the weight of authority accumulated over millions of years. Now we must decide whether to allow your species to continue spreading through the galaxy, or whether to contain you to your home system until we can understand what you truly are. The word containment hung in the air like a death sentence, and Jake Morrison felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. Around the Great Hall, hundreds of alien beings watched the human delegation with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. The weight of representing his entire species pressed down on his shoulders, but Captain Paul Grant stepped forward before Jake could speak. "Containment is just another word for prison," Paul said, and his military bearing made his words carry across the vast space. "You're talking about trapping billions of humans in one star system because we don't fit your mathematical models." Elder Zephon's towering form shifted slightly, and Jake caught a glimpse of something that might have been regret in the ancient being's posture. "It is not punishment, human. It is necessity. Your species represents an unknown variable in galactic stability. Until we understand why you develop differently, we cannot risk allowing you to spread further." Dr. Helen Ross moved closer to the center of the hall, and her scientific mind was already working on the problem. "You say your models have been accurate for 50 million years. That's an impressive track record, but it's also a limitation. Maybe the universe is changing in ways your old models can't account for." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. The suggestion that the universe itself might be evolving beyond their understanding was clearly disturbing to beings who had spent eons believing they had mastered the fundamental laws of existence. "The universe does not change," declared a crystalline, being that Jake recognized as the Vorthan ambassador. "Physical laws remain constant. Mathematical principles are eternal. Only species that refuse to accept reality create chaos." "Maybe chaos isn't always a bad thing," Amy Stone said softly, but her words carried clearly in the acoustically perfect hall. "Maybe sometimes you need chaos to create something new." Elder Zephon's attention focused on the young translator, and Jake felt the temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. "Chaos is the enemy of order, human. Chaos is what we have spent 50 million years preventing." Captain Grant stepped protectively in front of Amy, but kept his voice respectful. "With all due respect, Elder Zephon, you're asking us to accept imprisonment based on fear of the unknown. That's not justice, and it's not wisdom." "Then what do you propose?" Zephon asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his ancient voice. "How does one measure the worth of a species that cannot be measured by conventional means?" Paul Grant had been thinking about this moment since they first received the invitation, and now he saw his chance. "Give us a test. Find a problem that your conventional wisdom can't solve, and let us try to solve it. If we fail, then we'll accept your judgment. If we succeed, then you let us go free." The hall erupted in what Jake assumed was alien laughter, though the sounds ranged from musical chimes to grinding metallic screeches. Elder Zephon raised one massive hand, and silence fell immediately. "You would stake the freedom of your species on a single test?" Zephon asked, and his tone suggested he found the idea both amusing and admirable. "We would," Paul replied without hesitation. "Humans don't back down from challenges, especially when everything we care about is at stake." Dia Ross felt her heart racing as she realized what Paul was proposing. It was insanely dangerous, but it was also typically human to bet everything on their ability to find a solution where others had failed. Elder Zephon seemed to consider the proposal for long moments, while the assembled delegates whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. Finally he spoke, and his words carried the weight of final judgment. "Very well, human. We accept your proposal, but the test will not be of our choosing. We will present you with a problem that has plagued the galaxy for over 1,000 years. The greatest minds of hundreds of species have studied it without success. If you can solve what we cannot, then perhaps your chaotic nature has value after all." The great display materialized again, and this time it showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. At the outer edge, a growing black void was consuming star systems one by one and leaving behind empty space where entire civilizations had once thrived. We call it the Void Plague, Zephyr explained, and his voice carried a note of genuine fear. It began small in the Outer Rim territories, but it grows larger each year. It does not destroy matter or energy. It simply makes them cease to exist. Planets vanish without trace. Stars blink out of existence. Even space itself becomes empty in ways our instruments cannot measure. Jake stared at the display and felt cold fear creeping up his spine. The void was massive and growing, and if the pattern continued, it would eventually consume the entire galaxy, including Earth. We have sent expeditions to study the phenomenon, continued a delegate that resembled a giant insect. None have returned. We have tried to contain it with force fields and energy barriers. The void consumes them as easily as it consumes matter. We have attempted to analyze its composition and found nothing to analyze. It appears to be the complete absence of everything, added the Vorten ambassador. Not darkness, which is merely the absence of light. Not vacuum, which still contains quantum fluctuations. This is the absence of existence itself. Dr. Ross studied the expanding void pattern and felt her scientific training kick into high gear. How fast is it spreading, and is the rate consistent? The expansion accelerates, Zephyr replied. What began as a sphere 1 light year across has grown to encompass nearly 1,000 star systems. At current rates, it will reach core worlds within 10,000 years. That might sound like a long time to immortal beings, Paul Grant observed, but for shorter-lived species like humans, that's practically tomorrow. Indeed, Zephyr confirmed, which is why we offer this as your test. Solve the void plague and prove that human unpredictability has value. Fail and accept containment, knowing that you had the chance to earn your freedom. Jake looked around at his small team and saw determination mixed with terror in their faces. They were being asked to solve a problem that had stumped them most. Advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The logical response would be to admit defeat before they even started. Jake Morrison had not become a starship captain by accepting the logical response. We'll need access to all your data on the void. We'll need a ship capable of reaching the affected region. And we'll need permission to try solutions that might seem crazy to conventional thinking. Granted, Zephyr replied immediately. You will have access to our most advanced vessels and all accumulated knowledge about the phenomenon. But understand that if you fail, the consequences will be severe. The void is not merely a test. It is an active threat to all life in the galaxy. Amy Stone stepped forward, and her young voice carried surprising strength. If we solve this problem, we're not just earning freedom for humanity. We're saving everyone, aren't we? Yes, human, Zephyr confirmed. Success would demonstrate that your species has value beyond our ability to measure. Failure will confirm our fears about the dangers of unpredictable development. D.O. Ross felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but also felt excitement building in her chest. This was the kind of challenge that humans had always thrived on. The impossible problem that required thinking outside conventional boundaries. When do we start? She asked. Immediately, Zephyr replied. Time grows short, and the void does not wait for deliberation. Lieutenant Commander Ben Foster stood before a wall of data that stretched from floor to ceiling in the research chamber aboard the Eternary vessel Transcendence. The information represented 1,000 years of failed attempts to understand the void plague, and Ben felt overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what they were trying to accomplish. Beside him, Dr. Karen Webb traced patterns in the holographic displays with her fingers, while the eye specialist Tony Mitchell interfaced directly with the alien computer systems through neural implants that made Ben nervous just watching them. The data is incredible, but also frustrating, Karen said, as she manipulated the three-dimensional models floating in front of them. Every expedition that got close to the void recorded the same thing right before they vanished. All energy readings drop to absolute zero. All matter signatures disappear. Even quantum fluctuations stop registering on instruments. Tony looked up from his neural interface, and his eyes showed the strain of processing alien information systems. The Eternary databases contain over 40,000 theoretical models trying to explain the phenomenon. Everything from dimensional rifts to attacks by beings from parallel universes. None of them fit the observed data. Ben studied the expansion patterns and felt something nagging at the back of his mind. There was a pattern here, but it was not the kind of pattern that advanced alien civilizations would look for. It was messier and more random than anything their mathematical models would consider valid. Show me the original location where the void first appeared, you requested, and the display shifted to focus on a small region at the galaxy's edge. Now, show me what was there before the void started expanding. The historical data revealed a cluster of ancient structures that the database identified as Eternary constructs dating back millions of years. They were described as reality stabilizers designed to prevent dangerous quantum fluctuations in regions where space itself was naturally unstable. These stabilizers have been running for how long? Ben asked. Approximately 47 million. Years, Tony replied after querying the alien database. They were installed during the early expansion period when the Eternary were still actively shaping galactic development. Karen Webb moved closer to examine the stabilizer specifications, and her scientific training immediately spotted something interesting. These devices don't just prevent quantum fluctuations. They eliminate them entirely within a specific radius. Look at this energy signature. The display showed a perfectly smooth curve that represented the quantum field around each stabilizer. There were no random variations or unpredictable spikes that normally characterize the quantum foam underlying all existence. That's not natural, Ben observed. Quantum fields are supposed to be chaotic. That's what makes reality flexible enough to support matter and energy in the first place. Tony Mitchell disconnected from the neural interface and rubbed his temples. To ease the headache that always followed direct alien data access. The Eternary built these devices to create perfect order in regions of space that were naturally chaotic. But what happens when perfect order runs for millions of years without any balancing chaos? The system becomes too stable, Karen realized, and her voice carried growing excitement. Like a river that flows so smoothly, it stops carrying nutrients. Eventually, everything downstream starts dying. Ben felt pieces clicking together in his mind, and the pattern he had sensed earlier became clearer. The void isn't an attack or a natural disaster. It's the logical end result of too much order imposed on quantum chaos for too long. The implications were staggering. The Eternary had created the very problem they were trying to solve, and they had done it through their obsession with perfect mathematical order. The reality stabilizers had been working exactly as designed, but their long-term effect was to create dead zones where the quantum randomness necessary for existence could no longer function. We need to test this theory, Karen said in her hands. We're already working to set up simulation parameters. If perfect order is killing the quantum foam, then we should be able to reverse the process by reintroducing controlled chaos. The Eternary won't like that solution, Tony warned. Everything about their civilization is built on the principle that order is good and chaos is dangerous. Asking them to deliberately introduce chaos into their systems will go against millions of years of cultural development. Ben stared at the void expansion data and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They were not just trying to solve a scientific problem. They were challenging the fundamental worldview of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilization. Show me the quantum signature of human space, he requested, and the display shifted to show the region around Earth and its colonies. The difference was immediately obvious. Where Eternary space showed smooth ordered curves, the human regions were full of random spikes and chaotic variations. It looked messy and unpredictable compared to the mathematical perfection of alien-controlled space. Our space looks like chaos compared to theirs, Karen observed. But look at the vitality readings. Our quantum fields are much more active and flexible. Because humans never tried to eliminate chaos, Tony added. We learned to work with it. instead of against it. Our technology adapts to random variations instead of trying to eliminate them. Ben felt a crazy idea forming in his mind, and he knew it was exactly the kind of impossible solution that might actually work. What if we could use human chaos to restart the quantum foam in void-affected regions? Not eliminate the Eternary stabilizers, but balance them with controlled randomness. How do you create controlled randomness? Corinne asked, though her eyes showed she was already thinking along the same lines. With the most chaotic thing humans have ever created, Ben replied, and his smile was both excited and terrified. Human art and music and literature. The patterns of human creativity are genuinely random because they come from emotional and intuitive sources that can't be mathematically modeled. Tony stared at him as if he had suggested using magic to solve a physics problem. You want to fight the void with poetry and paintings. Not fight it, Ben corrected. Heal it. The void isn't evil or malicious. It's just dead. We need to bring it back to life by reintroducing the quantum randomness that makes existence possible. Corinne was already running calculations, and her excitement was building as the numbers started to make sense. Human creative patterns could be translated into quantum frequencies. If we could broadcast them into void-affected regions, we might be able to restart the natural chaos that the stabilizers have been suppressing. The energy requirements would be enormous, Tony warned, and we would need to interface directly with quantum fields that have been dead for centuries. The risk of losing expedition members would be extremely high. Ben thought about the alternative and knew they had no choice. If we don't try, then the void keeps expanding until it consumes everything, including Earth. The risk is worth taking. The research chamber fell silent as they contemplated what they were proposing. They were going to suggest that the galaxy's older civilization had accidentally created their greatest threat through their obsession with perfect order. They were going to recommend using human chaos as medicine for a universe that was dying from too much stability. The Eternary are going to think we're insane, Corinne said quietly. Maybe, Ben agreed. But maybe that's exactly what this situation needs. A little human insanity to balance out 50 million years of alien logic. Tony Mitchell reconnected to the alien database and began compiling their findings into a presentation that would either save the galaxy or get them all in prison for the rest of their lives. Trying to find out if the universe is ready for human solutions to alien problems. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of a ship that was larger than anything humanity had ever built and felt small despite his position of authority. The vessel Harmony was a joint construction project completed in record time, and it combined human creativity with alien technology in ways that should have been impossible. The bridge crew included both humans and aliens working side by side, and Jake could feel the tension that came from species who had never collaborated before attempting the most dangerous mission in galactic history, approaching the void boundary. Now Captain reported Nicole Price from the tactical station, and her voice remained steady despite the readings that showed they were entering a region where existence itself began to break down. All instruments show normal space up to the boundary line, then complete absence beyond. Alex Turner looked up from the communications console, and his face showed the strain of managing translation protocols between dozens of different species. The quantum broadcast array is ready, sir. We have human music, art, and literature converted to quantum frequencies and ready for transmission. The AI companion Phoenix has calculated the optimal pattern sequences. Jake nodded and tried to project confidence he did not entirely feel. The theory was sound, and the testing had shown promising results, but they were about to attempt something that had never been tried before. They were going to broadcast human creativity directly into the quantum foam and hope it could restart the natural chaos that made existence possible. Status report from all departments, Jake ordered. Engineering reports all systems nominal. Called out Chief Engineer Lisa Carter from her station. The quantum resonance chambers are holding steady, and the human cultural database is fully loaded into the transmission systems. Science station ready. added Dr. Karen Webb, who had volunteered to join the mission despite the extreme risks. Quantum field analyzers are calibrated and we're monitoring for any signs of foam regeneration. Alien support systems operational. Reported the Vorthan liaison, whose crystalline form reflected the bridge lighting in complex patterns. Eternary reality stabilizers in the target region have been set to minimal power as requested. Jake felt his heart racing as they crossed into the void boundary and immediately understood why previous expeditions had never returned. The sensation was indescribable and terrifying. It was not like entering darkness or vacuum. It was like entering a region where the concept of existing had simply been forgotten by the universe itself. All readings drop into zero, Nicole reported, and her professional calm could not hide the fear in her voice. We're maintaining life support through internal power, but everything outside the hull shows complete absence. Phoenix, are you still with us? Jake asked, and waited for the AI's response with growing anxiety. I am here, Captain, though I confess this environment is unlike anything in my programming. The AI replied, and its synthetic voice carried undertones that Jake had never heard before. I am having difficulty maintaining coherent thought patterns in a region where information itself seems to cease existing. Jake looked around the bridge and saw his crew struggling with the same disorientation he felt. Human minds were not designed to process the complete absence of existence, and several crew members were showing signs of psychological stress. Begin quantum transmission immediately, he ordered, before this environment affects our ability to function. Alex Turner's hands moved over his controls, and suddenly the bridge filled with the sound of human music being converted to quantum frequencies. Jake recognized Beethoven's Ninth Symphony mixed with jazz improvisation and rock guitar. Solos all translated into mathematical patterns that resonated with the deepest levels of reality. Transmission commencing, Alex reported, broadcasting across all quantum frequencies with maximum power output. For long moments, nothing seemed to happen, and Jake began to fear they had made a terrible mistake. The void remained empty and lifeless around them, and their instruments continued to register complete absence of everything, including hope. Then Nicole Price gasped and pointed at her tactical display. Captain, I'm reading quantum fluctuations at bearing 27 Mark 8, small but definitely present. Confirmed, added Corin Webb from the science station. The quantum foam is regenerating in localized areas. The pattern matches theoretical predictions for chaos reintroduction into overstabilized regions. Jake felt hope building in his chest but forced himself to remain cautious. Expand transmission range and increase power output. Let's see if we can create larger areas of regeneration. The ship's systems responded, and suddenly the void around them began to shimmer with possibility. Where before there had been absolute nothingness, now there were tiny sparkles of quantum activity that looked like stars being born from pure mathematics. It's working, whispered Amy Stone, who had insisted on joining the mission despite her role as a translator rather than a scientist. The universe is remembering how to exist. But the celebration was premature. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship as the quantum regeneration process triggered unexpected reactions in the surrounding space. The boundary between existence and void began to fluctuate wildly, and Jake realized they were in serious danger. The regeneration is destabilizing local space-time, Corinne reported with growing alarm. We're creating quantum storms that could tear the ship apart. Phoenix, can you compensate by adjusting the transmission patterns? Jake asked. Attempting compensation now, Captain, the AI replied. However, I must note that we are essentially teaching the universe how to exist again, and the process is inherently unpredictable. Jake felt the ship shudder around them, as reality itself struggled to remember the rules of existence. This was the moment that would determine whether human chaos could heal what Eternity Order had broken, or whether their attempt would make the situation worse. All hands brace for quantum storm, he announced over the ship's communication system. We're about to find out if human creativity is stronger than alien mathematics. The storm hit them with forces that human science had no names for. Space itself twisted around the ship in ways that hurt to look at directly, and Jake felt his perception of reality bending under the strain. But through it all, the quantum transmission continued, and slowly, but surely the void began to fill with the chaotic beauty of human creativity. Captain, we're detecting massive quantum foam regeneration across a sphere 100 light-years in diameter. Nicole reported with amazement in her voice. The void is retreating, and normal space is being restored. Jake looked out at the view screen and saw something that brought tears to his eyes. Stars were appearing where none had existed for 1,000 years. Planets were materializing from quantum probability and taking their places in restored solar systems. The universe was healing itself using human chaos as medicine. Mission successful, he announced to his crew, and felt pride that went beyond personal achievement. Humanity has proven that sometimes the universe needs a little disorder to stay healthy. But even as they celebrated, Jake knew this was only the beginning. They had healed one small section of the void, but the plague still stretched across thousands of star systems. The real work of galactic restoration was just starting, and it would require cooperation between human creativity and alien wisdom on a scale never before attempted. Set course for the next affected region, he ordered. We have a galaxy to save. The Great Hall of the Galactic Preservation Council looked different now, and Jake Morrison could not quite identify what had changed until he realized that the perfect symmetry was gone. Where before every detail had been mathematically precise, now there were subtle variations that made the space feel more alive and welcoming. Even Elder Zephyr appeared different as his towering form showed small imperfections that somehow made him seem more real than before. The restoration proceeds ahead of all projections, Zephyr announced to the assembled delegates, and his voice carried wonder instead of the ancient authority Jake remembered from their first meeting. In the 6 months since humanity implemented the chaos solution, we have restored over 3,000 star systems, and the void retreats faster each day. Captain Paul Grant stood beside Jake, and both men wore the new uniforms of the Galactic Integration Force. The organization had been created specifically to manage the cooperation between human creativity and alien technology, and Paul had accepted the role of military coordinator despite his initial reluctance to work so closely with beings who had considered imprisoning his species. The success rate exceeds our most optimistic estimates, added Dr. Helen Ross, who now served as scientific liaison between human researchers and the galaxy's greatest minds. Each restored region becomes more stable than the original space. The quantum foam shows improved resilience and flexibility that prevents similar problems from occurring again. Amy Stone translated for several delegate species that have requested to hear the report in their native languages, and Jake marveled at how naturally she had adapted to working with dozens of different communication systems. The young woman who had been nervous about speaking to alien beings was now one of the most respected translators in galactic history. Zephyr gestured toward a massive display that showed the current state of the galaxy, and Jake felt pride as he watched the expanding green zones that represented restored space pushing back the red areas of void plague. What we have witnessed challenges everything we believed about the nature of existence itself. Order and chaos are not enemies, as we assumed for 50 million years. They are partners in the dance of creation. A murmur of agreement ran through the assembled delegates, though Jake could see that some species were still struggling with the concept. The Vorthan ambassador had been particularly resistant to accepting that their mathematical perfection needed balancing with human unpredictability. The implications extend far beyond the void plague, continued a delegate from the energy beings of Proxima, whose form pulsed with frequencies that Jake was learning to interpret as excitement. If chaos and order must be balanced, then perhaps our entire approach to galactic civilization requires fundamental revision. Dear Karen Webb stepped forward from her position with the human scientific team, and her confidence had grown tremendously. During the months of working alongside alien researchers, we've learned that diversity of thought is just as important as diversity of biology. Each species brings unique perspectives that can solve problems others cannot even see. The humans have taught us that age does not always equal wisdom, admitted Zephyr, and the statement sent shockwaves through the hall. In 50 million years, we accumulated vast knowledge, but we also accumulated blind spots that prevented us from seeing new solutions to old problems. Jake found himself thinking about the journey that had brought humanity to this moment. 6 months ago, they had been facing imprisonment, or worse, for the crime of existing, in ways that could not be predicted. Now they were partners in reshaping galactic civilization and proving that the youngest species could teach the oldest new ways of thinking. The Innovation Initiative will be our greatest achievement, announced a new voice, and Jake turned to see Commander Ben Foster enter the hall, wearing the insignia of the Joint Research Division. We're pairing human creativity with alien wisdom to tackle problems that neither could solve alone. The preliminary results suggest we can accelerate technological development by orders of magnitude. Tony Mitchell followed Ben into the hall, and his neural interface technology had been upgraded with alien components that allowed him to process information at speeds that would have been impossible with purely human systems. The AI collaboration project has been particularly successful. Human artificial intelligence learns and adapts, while alien AI provides stability and computational power. Together, they're solving theoretical problems that have puzzled scientists for millennia. Elders of form seemed to shift, and Jake realized the ancient being was allowing himself to show emotion for the first time in their interactions. We feared humanity because you could not be predicted or controlled. We now understand that this unpredictability is exactly what the galaxy needs to continue growing and evolving. But the greatest lesson has been about ourselves, Zephyr continued, and his voice carried a humility that Jake found deeply moving. In our pursuit of perfect order, we have become static. We confuse stability with stagnation and wisdom with inflexibility. Humanity has reminded us that true strength comes from the ability to adapt and change. Lisa Carter stepped forward from her position with the engineering teams, and her weathered hands gestured toward the restoration data. The quantum foam in restored regions shows patterns we never expected. It's not just random chaos or perfect order. It's organized complexity that can respond to changing conditions while maintaining fundamental stability. Like a jazz improvisation, added Nicole Price, who had become fascinated with human music during her time working with the cultural translation teams. There are underlying structures and rules, but within those boundaries, there's infinite room for creativity and variation. Jake felt a moment of profound gratitude as he looked around the hall at humans and aliens working together toward common goals. The fear and suspicion that had marked their first meeting had been replaced by mutual respect and genuine friendship between species. "What happens now?" asked Alex Turner, who had been promoted to head of interspecies communications after his success during the Void missions. "We've solved the immediate crisis, but the galaxy is full of other challenges that might benefit from this new approach." Elders of Fund's response surprised everyone in the hall. Now we learn. For the first time in 50 million years, the Eternary admit that we do not have all the answers. We propose a new structure for galactic governance based on cooperation rather than guidance. Each species contributes according to their unique strengths and perspectives. The council becomes a true partnership instead of a hierarchy, Paul Grant observed, and Jake could hear the satisfaction in his friend's voice. No single species dominates regardless of age or technological advancement. Precisely, Zephyr confirmed. We have learned that evolution never stops. Even we must continue growing and changing, or risk becoming obsolete. Humanity has shown us that the youngest perspective can be the most valuable because it has not yet learned what is supposed to be impossible. Jake Morrison looked around at his friends and colleagues and felt a deep sense of completion. They had not just saved their species from imprisonment. They had helped create a new model for galactic civilization based on diversity, cooperation, and the understanding that chaos and order were both necessary for healthy growth. "The galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place," he said, and his words carried the promise of adventures yet to come. I can't wait to see what we discover when every species contributes their unique gifts to solving the mysteries of existence. Elder Zephyr's form seemed to glow with an inner light that Jake had never seen before. Indeed, Commander Morrison. For the first time in 50 million years, the future is unpredictable, and we have learned that unpredictability is the most precious gift in the universe.